Hello and welcome to ESG Talk, your go-to source for insights and advice from leaders in environmental, social and governance. I'm your host, Andie Wood. The world is moving towards mandatory sustainability disclosures. In many markets, those sustainability disclosures will be digital. But what does that mean? And does there need to be a standard digital format so that the data can be easily analysed and compared? Joining us today are two experts on this subject. John Turner is the Chief Executive Officer of XBRL International, a global not-for-profit consortium that provides an open international standard for digital business reporting. Also joining us is Wes Bricker, the Chairman of XBRL's Board of Directors. Wes is also the Vice Chair and US Trust Solution Co-Leader at PwC. So, John, can you start off by giving our audience an overview of what XBRL is and what it does?
Sure. So XBRL is a standard that helps regulators, standard setters like the FASB and the ISSB and the EFRAG standard setters and many others around the world move reporting from paper to data. It's been around for a long time. It's in use in many parts of the world. Many of your listeners will be familiar with it because they're from public companies, and public companies have been reporting to securities regulators for a long time. There's one alphabet and grammar that's really just for all the software to work with. That's what we at XBRL International develop, a set of specifications that allow interoperability and machine interchange of information. The important part of the dictionaries, we call them taxonomies, but those dictionaries allow people to create words, and those words need to use the alphabet and grammar. The words in the dictionary are representing disclosure standards of various kinds of all sorts right around the world. And then the third layer is the provision of reports by companies. What they do is they create tags, or they mark up different parts of their reports, and that process is called tagging. So for most companies, there is this process of looking at the words in the dictionary and associating them with some part of their disclosures. That exercise is, as I say, very well defined in the financial reporting sphere, and it's coming soon to sustainability disclosure near you.
Fabulous. So now we know what XBRL is. Why is that so important, particularly within the context of the regulatory frameworks that we're talking about?
It's an incredibly powerful piece of the infrastructure by which users of information get access at a lower cost to high quality, reliable information about a number of things. If I step back, it's 2024, it's not 1924. And that's a good thing because we live in a digital age. And XBRL, as John talked about, helps us to transmit company reports and all of the content in a digital way. It's not just a PDF form, but it's structured information so that computers can consume that, so that users can get access to the information that they need to make decisions as they allocate capital, as they make governance decisions, or in many other domains, whether it's energy or other statistical information like climate information. All of that is better when it's structured and digital. But on your question about the context of regulatory frameworks, let me just hit two aspects that come to the surface for me in that regard. The first is regulators really care about this because they're acting in the public interest and they're delivering something as a public good. So the first effect of digitizing information in the public domain is that it reduces the cost of capital for companies as they get access to the capital they need to operate, to grow, and to compete, to give people jobs, and to produce goods and services. It also, for investors, helps in the fairness of the markets because all participants can come into the markets without the barrier to entry of information. So digitizing information lowers the cost of capital. It also makes our markets more fair. And both of those things help to serve the public interest by producing a public good, which is extraordinarily valuable within markets. That's how we see XBRL contributing to the regulatory landscape. Of course, it helps regulators do their jobs with monitoring information and surveillance and so forth. It helps investors do their jobs in allocating capital. And of course, it helps companies make better decisions as they look at their information. They compare themselves to peers and others as they make internal decisions. All of those drivers are drivers toward digital data, which inform decision making.
And since we're in the capital markets, I think we should probably also talk as well about as the CSRD, which is across public and private companies, about the SEC's new rule for climate related disclosures. That includes sort of standardized inline XBRL reporting for climate risks and financial related climate information. So how does the XBRL standard support that kind of digital sustainability reporting? We've talked a little bit about the accessibility and supporting the regulated side. What else does it bring to that kind of sustainability information in the markets?
I would say sustainability reporting is a close sister to what we just talked about with financial information. So there's a lot of similarities to the past work of achieving greater digitization of financial information, and it has applicability in the sustainability reporting in very similar ways. It reduces the cost of getting access to high quality information to improve decisions. It improves the fairness of markets. And XBRL Global Standards helps support that, whether it's supporting financial decisions or tax decisions, prudential or compliance reporting. We can then bring into that dictionary, as John talked about, taxonomies that deal with sustainability standards.
This is just one more example of the use of digital reporting to get across corporate information, public company, private company. It's used in that way all over the world. But typically that's been financial in the past. Now, there are some subtle differences. So if you look at sustainability disclosures, you discover that many investors are pretty focused on a range of information that might be heavy on narrative and light on metrics. And of course, the metrics themselves are a bit different. They'll reference things like physical intensity measures, like grams of CO2 emitted per passenger mile, or liters of water used per euro of revenue. The standard supports all of those things, but we have been working very intensively with the sustainability standard setters to ensure that their needs for those kinds of information requirements are met. But in a nutshell, it is exactly the same as what is happening in the financial sphere. It's just that the reports might look a bit different because it's different content.
Yeah, so we should be looking to see some of the benefits that we've seen from the financial side. So just to sort of touch on it, we've mentioned SEC and CSRD. I think a lot of people are familiar with the fact that they're not 100% aligned yet, all of these disclosure requirements around the world. Interoperability is coming, but as we've discussed many times on this podcast, but it's not quite there yet. So how does the digital mandate align? Is it in a kind of a similar place where there's maybe a little bit of difference in the way that these digital mandates are working, or are we seeing that there is definite alignment with the format for the CSRD, format for climate disclosures, and so on?
Yeah, good question. So, at the fundamental level, all that XBRL is doing is modeling what's happening with the standards themselves. So, if the standards are different, then the digital representation of those standards are going to be a little different. If you think about this at a macro level, both, for example, the SEC's climate rule and the EU's or EFRAG's E1 rule, which is the climate requirement under the EFRAG standards, are based on the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, as well as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. As you know, the CSRD covers a range of other areas, including pollution, water, marine resources, corporate conduct, labor force, supply chain workers, a bunch of other things. The CSRD covers E, S, and G, the whole spectrum, whereas the SEC's climate, pretty much the climate rule just does what it says on the tin, right? But in terms of climate, there are very significant similarities. There are some important content differences, but we're also concerned about differences that are like between their XBRL taxonomies. And it is important that we have ways of connecting these taxonomies. So if there is being something modeled in the US for scope 1 emissions, then users want to be able to compare scope 1 emissions in the US with scope 1 emissions in Europe. They should be able to, because they have been defined in the same way. And as long as the standard setters agree that, then it should be possible for us to link those taxonomies. 2024 is a big focus on alignment in this field because people understand that's really important for issuers. It's also really important for users.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on that point. John has done really important work, along with a number of others, in the space to defragment and to bring together a more unified user experience. Because as we always talk about, we're starting from the user experience and working our way back. The more we can focus on defragmenting in this space, the better.
So it's good to hear that it's going that direction, because the word interoperability is a hot topic in sustainability. Now, I think we've already touched a little bit on the fact that obviously the standard has been used for quite a long time already in financial reporting and some other domains as well. And we started to mention the fact that we've seen some benefits coming from that. So I think you already mentioned something like decreased costs and maybe the ability to automate. What kind of things have we seen that digitization has brought to the financial data, and that we also hope very much we will see it bringing to the sustainability data once it is tagged and out there?
So you mentioned the US. I mean, in the US, we've seen a remarkable level of process innovation as a result of the XBRL mandate that the US SEC imposed on companies a few years ago. Corporates have taken advantage of new approaches, yes, including software offered by companies like Workiva, to automate and systematize the creation of management and external reports. Companies have moved away from a paper oriented basis for the preparation of the close and the creation of a wide range of mission critical reports. So, companies, to a large extent, in their financial reporting, have not just digitized the reports that they provide to the regulator, they've digitized the entire reporting function. And this both increases efficiency and it lowers cost. There are plenty of analyses about sort of the positive return on investment provided by these kind of disclosure management tools that replace paper with a modern workflow. And yes, just under the surface of that software, the XBRL standard helps much of that work happen. So certainly automation and decreased costs have been the order of the day in the financial sphere. And I guess we would see that following along in the sustainability area.
Just to build on that point, maybe two additional audiences for the investors. We talked about lower costs, but also additional data points. There's a good amount of evidence to suggest that with digitization in footnotes, we see an increased number of data points within footnotes rather than just qualitative descriptions. Companies more readily putting in quantitative information as they look for comparisons. And then on the regulatory side, we also see regulators like the SEC, but not limited to them, using more algorithmic tools to enhance monitoring supervision. And that's helpful for everyone who's participating in the market to make sure that the conduct in the market is fair, to make sure that the conduct in the market is consistent with the rules. And that helps, again, to reduce the cost of capital across the board.
So I think we started to get there into some of the things that benefits for investors and into the markets. And obviously, one of the things that has been a request from investors for is assurance on sustainability information. And that leads to a very sort of obvious next question: is just the sustainability information itself assured, or what about the digital representation of that information? Now, in Europe, there is assurance on the digital representation of the financial information that is tagged. So do you think there should be more of that, where it's not just that we assure, paper numbers, that we also assure that the digital representation itself is something that can be relied on?
There can and I believe should be assurance over the markup or the tagging that's carried out, because that helps raise the confidence and the quality of the information that a user of that information is experiencing, raising confidence that the information is tagged and that the underlying information can be relied upon. So, what I would say around that is that clearly the next step is for policymakers to continue to advance the work in this area, to agree that assurance over tagging is beneficial to achieving the data quality and the reliance objectives that is shared across many, if not all, policymakers and standard setters. There's still some more work to do in this overall direction toward higher quality and greater assurance.
Obviously, it's still a very new process as well. So, as well as it just there being the room for there to be more of assurance over digitization, John, is there also room to maybe also look at the process that gets us to that assurance as well?
The missing piece here is standardization of the rules for the assurance providers. So we need standards there from the International Audit and Assurance Standards Board, or IAASB, as well as its counterparts around the world, including the CCAOB. We really need high quality and a single set of high quality standards in this field, or consistent set of standards in this field, so that people aren't needing to look to local standards from at a local country level, which covers it's increased costs right around the world. So I think there is some policy work to be done before we will reach that at a perhaps beyond Europe. But I'm optimistic that people increasingly understand that there is no point in auditing the rest of the materials or providing assurance over the rest of the disclosure and not also looking at that markup, because it's the markup that investors are relying on.
Our season 3 theme is strength in numbers. It's obviously a bit of a double meaning. So we're partially focusing that on the importance of data specifically for transparency and credibility, which is obviously very much into this digitization topic. So why is it so important that sustainability information be available in a standard digital format?
I think the level of demand from investors alone should be enough to convince most people. Investors need, and they continue to state this clearly, that they need high quality, consistent, comparable, trustworthy, and digital disclosures.
I would just join in that same point, John, in flagging two ways that investors are being served by digitizing disclosures, especially in the sustainability area. The first is the traceability of information to source documents. That's helpful context, but that traceability is really enhanced whenever we provide digital information in a consistent way, for example, with XBRL. But another is efficiency, and that's the efficiency of investors in locating relevant information. Clearly, investors are looking at a wider set of data. It's not just financial information, it's also non financial and sustainability information. And so, the efficiency of having a machine readable data set, something more than just a PDF, so that investors can apply data analytics, they can increasingly apply algorithms and even AI to that information. XBRL helps to accelerate those different technologies by feeding high quality structured data into it.
What does AI mean to standardized language like XBRL? I think some would say that maybe AI can do it all itself.
Look, we're biased, but we don't think that's right. And we've spoken to lots of AI professionals who agree with us. We think it means three things. First of all, we think that structured data, that is where the facts are being marked up using words in an XBRL dictionary, are kind of like AI gold dust. It provides machine consumable, AI friendly, authoritative data. This is information that comes straight from the horse's mouth. It comes directly from the company. That's incredibly valuable. And yes, hopefully it will always have been independently reviewed. Second, we think that if it's structured, it's going to be used. So by dozens or an awful lot of different AI processes are going to see that AI gold dust. Hey, there's structured data over there. Let's go and consume that for a variety of purposes: investment, credit, all kinds of peer analysis, maybe the creation of new financial products. But if it's structured, it's going to get looked at in the first case by AIs and multiple competing AIs, and that's good for everybody. And third, we think that before too long, AI is likely to help companies mark up their filings, because it's true that AIs can look at unstructured text and help put structure around them, but emphasis on the word help. We've all seen some of the outcomes of that work where it isn't high quality, and we think that the AI will get you a long way, but it won't get to investor grade information. Companies will need to help those AIs in the last 5 or 10 or 15% of the effort. But if they do that, that process should speed up this exercise of doing the markup, and there's less for companies to do in terms of managing the XBRL aspects of their disclosures. They'll be able to focus more on describing their financial and their sustainability performance, focus on their story, which is what they need to do. And I guess finally, we think that auditors will have access to the same tools, and that will make life easier for them as well. It's a pretty exciting period, but the idea that structured data is less relevant when we're living in an AI world, we think is exactly the wrong way around. It's going to be some of the most important data out there.
Excellent. Okay, so we're now talking about really accessible, hopefully comparable sustainability data out there for investors. They will get all sorts of benefits from this. Let's close on something that's really helpful for many of our listeners who are sustainability professionals who have never done this before, but are going to be looking at this for their future sustainability reporting. What should they be considering when they get to the XBRL implementation phase of their reporting process? Let's give them something practical to end with.
Maybe I'll start on that, Andie. Very practically and concretely, I think it's important to get started. This is the time to really move forward. We know that many companies will be dealing with the need to report information in multiple jurisdictions, might be multiple countries or different regulators, even within a given country. And they'll need to do that concurrently. And all of that requires good planning, a readiness assessment to understand how and where to really prioritize, because this is a significant effort. So start as soon as possible. And then to do it in a systematic way, the need for systems and technology, of course, policies and procedures, training, good controls around the completeness and the accuracy of information, and really with an orientation, a strategic orientation of thinking digital from the very start of that process. That's what will help companies to really have less rework, to have higher quality built in, designed into that process as digital mandates arrive, as changes are introduced, and certainly systems and controls with a digital mindset improve the experience of those who are responsible for maintaining and operating them as they're designed. So building in quality, building in trust from the very start requires getting started.
One kind of practical point that maybe people should be thinking about as they're doing that planning and as they're developing their systems and processes for both acquiring this information and then being able to publish it. There's a huge focus in the standards, the sustainability standards, and sort of embedded in the digital representation of those standards, the taxonomies, about linkages across information. So keep in mind the fact that it's going to be important for a number of these mandates to really be able to provide really strong cross-referencing about the linkages between different aspects of your work. These are my targets and these are the policies that support those targets. That process of linking is going to be required in your documents. It's going to be required, it's very likely, in your digital disclosures. So as well as starting early, think about links from the very beginning.
So, Wes and John, thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope that your listeners found that really informative on a topic that I know is something that has not necessarily been front of mind until now.
Thank you very much, Andie.
Thanks a lot, Andie. Good to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, sustainability, audit, and risk. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our episode from Season 2, Navigating Global ESG Reporting Standards, which features the Global Reporting Initiative and Deloitte. In the meantime, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to see future episodes on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. And we'll talk again soon.